You know that Keeley Companies is all about fostering the world-class culture through their incredible cultural pillars. Well, it was time to add a seventh cultural pillar, Keeley Green. Guided by the mission to raise the sustainability standards by which they design, build, operate, and live, Keeley Green is dedicated to using a holistic approach to leave a positive impact on our environment, create a future that is sustainable for generations to come. In the words of Rusty Keeley, we are just getting started. You can learn more about that just getting started mentality and all the work they do by visiting my friends at Keeley Companies online at keeleycompanies.com.
Welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. John is the #1 national best-selling author of the book On Fire. He's a world-class inspirational speaker, and he's the host of the Live Inspired podcast. John interviews extraordinary individuals on their life story so that you can wake up from accidental living and more fully live your life story. Here's your host, John O'Leary.
Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. For more than 3 decades, Carolyn Adams Miller has been a globally recognized expert in goal setting, in grit and happiness, and in success. And yet, there's always that part of the story, isn't there? And yet, as a Harvard graduate, a black belt martial artist, and the author of 8 life-changing best-selling books, Carolyn's path from overcoming bulimia to inspiring millions embodies resilience and determination. Today, Carolyn joins us and shares her story of transformation, the science behind effective goal setting, and her groundbreaking bridge methodology for achieving lasting success. My friends, with Christmas approaching and the new year right behind that, I want to take a minute to really refocus and recenter your life on what matters most. When I learn a little bit about some conventional strategies like setting SMART goals and why they so frequently fall short, and how crafting an intentional, purpose-driven, goal-setting pathway can lead to meaningful change in your world. It's an amazing story you're about to hear, not only about her life, her trajectory, her overcoming, but your ability to do likewise. So family, brothers, sisters, daughters, children, sons, my friends, if you need a spark to reignite your ambitions and the reminder that the best of your days remain ahead, this conversation with Carolyn is for you. So Carolyn, welcome to Live Inspired with John O'Leary.
Thank you for having me, John. I really appreciate it.
Well, what the audience does not know is you and I just spent 14 minutes wiping tears, laughing out loud, rehashing biographies and life stories, and what turns us on for work each day. But if I were to ask you, why do you do what you do? How would you respond to that today?
I don't want to give you a trite answer, so I want to just be sure I'm thoughtful. I do what I do today because I've lived a really privileged, if hard at times, life. And I do believe I was put on this earth to help people do hard things and to give them the tools, and it's usually evidence-based tools, to do those hard things, because I believe that's when they can inspire other people to also live their best lives. So it's all about uplifting the collective. And I think I can make a difference. I think I have made a difference, but I think my best years are in front of me.
So let's, instead of talking about your future, I want to start by moving backward just a little bit. I want to talk about your past. You and I, before we hit record, talked about 5 generations of impact.
Yeah.
Without spending an hour and a half on it, talk about your family of origin.
Yeah, so it's a fascinating family on both sides. So the most well-known, maybe kind of interesting part of my family is in the 1912 Olympics, my grandfather's brothers made world history, and they went 1-2 in the same Olympic event, which is the standing high jump. And they had finished both of them, Ben and Platt Adams, just out of the medals in 1908. And they had the psychology of the near miss. They just decided to go back and train harder and do more so that they could achieve their best selves. I grew up with those stories of Olympic gold, silver, and bronze medalists. And I learned from hearing those stories as a child that doing hard things and becoming your best self is a collection of mindset, of setting big goals, but being surrounded by the right people. So they were just these handsome go-getters. So that's my father's side. Now, on both sides of my family, great grandparents, those were Abraham Lincoln's like best friends. And it blew me away to see it was on both sides. One grew up in Springfield, Illinois with him, and the local newspapers recorded their handball contests stories. And by all accounts, they were great friends. Then he came to Washington. And on my mother's side was an immigrant from Germany, Jacob Carr, who was brilliant. And he invented chronometers and he was a watchmaker. And Abraham Lincoln walked from the White House to his watch store, which is now the Federal Trade Commission, constantly to have his watch fixed or timed or whatever. And he was in Lincoln's honor guard. And I often wonder, what was it like when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated for both of my great-great-grandfathers, the legacy of grief and loss of somebody so important and powerful. It's fascinating. So then there are all kinds of other people. My sister does amateur genealogy, but those are the most interesting sides of my family. And then there's just a lot of people with ordinary grit, like my grandmother, probably the most important person in my life, who just did hard things throughout the Depression, divorced an alcoholic, abusive husband. And she taught me what joy and laughter was. And so I have a complicated family, and it's a good family.
You have a complicated family. You've got a complicated past, but it has led you perfectly to where you are and the impact you're making today. You, as a young girl, were extremely successful at just about everything you touched, whether that was
Yeah.
academic, athletic, popularity, everything you did as a kid, you did well.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that.
Well, I'm not sure if I was popular. I grew up in DC. It's a town of go-getters and people obsessed with power. And I tested well. I got into really good schools. The expectation was I would go on to the best schools, especially with stories of Olympians in my family. But my mother was a very damaged woman, extremely damaged. And I have all kinds of thoughts about what happened to her as a child. My grandmother, my hero, may not have been around enough to protect her from what was around her. So my mother's fury often came out towards me, and it was vicious, and it never ended. She died during COVID, and there was never a moment where I felt loved or was told I was loved. I don't remember her ever hugging me. I don't remember her ever saying she was proud of me. And those scars were extraordinary. Still, I've had good therapists, 5 of them, five good therapists, and lots of group therapy. So that was complicated. My father he was abusive to me physically. And I often wondered why I was the one that he chose to abuse. Why me? With my mother's encouragement, why? And he was a beloved man. So we were that typical family where behind closed doors, the wheels came off the bus. So I developed bulimia at the age of 14 at this wonderful private school, the National Cathedral School. And it was very common in the 70s, except I was a competitive swimmer. I was playing the piano at a high level. I got good grades, I tested well, all that good stuff. But it was never enough. And I think this introduction of bulimia into my life by 2 older friends made me think, well, if I get the perfect body, all of this will go away. I'm going to be happy and people will love me and the rest of it. I'll get a boyfriend. Oh my God, that might happen. And none of those things happened. I fell headlong into an abyss of addiction that I clawed my way out of in my 20s. And that is the touchstone for everything else I've done in life, is overcoming bulimia at a time when it was a death sentence. Nobody got better. All there were stories of people succumbing to it. So I wrote the first autobiography by anyone who overcame bulimia. My name is Caroline. Changed my life. I mean, there was a day in February of 1984 where I was sitting in a 12-step meeting for compulsive eaters. And I heard a woman say a sentence I'd never heard before. My name is Betsy, and I'm recovering from bulimia one day at a time. And every hair on my arm stood up. Did it again, just now, like 40 years later. And I put down my needlepoint and I looked at her and I thought, someone else in this world recovered from bulimia. I don't have to live like this. I don't have to puke up my food with blood coming down my chin, hiding this. I don't have to live like this. And I latched onto her, and my life began that night, February of 1984, in a church in Baltimore. It taught me what gratitude was. It taught me what grit was. It taught me what giving was all about. It taught me love. It taught me everything. And so I'm so lucky to have hit bottom in my early 20s after all this legacy of pain. And there was more pain to come. We've just talked about that. But there's a lot of blessings that happen when your life bottoms out and you're suicidal at 21. Because I had a Harvard degree and it was worthless to me. All of these things, I was a billboard. I had resume virtues. I didn't have real virtues. And I think I've made it up now. I think I've given enough back to the world that I've made up for those years of self-absorption and sadness. And, life is good now.
You shared so much there, and I want to unpack just a little bit of it. But not only did you graduate Harvard, shortly after that, you marry your college sweetheart.
Yeah. And we're
And
still married.
the man, right, 4+ decades later, we're still
Yeah.
doing this thing together, man, hanging
Yeah.
on by our fingertips. We're doing
Yeah.
life. And bulimia has your life, and your husband doesn't even know about it.
Nope.
You have scars on the tops of your knuckles sometimes from getting sick, and your
You did
husband
your
doesn't even.
homework.
To me, it's remarkable, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. But nobody knew the signs of bulimia. You have to raise your hand and say to someone, when my eyes are watering and they're bloodshot and there's scars on the back of my hand, I'm disappearing to the bathroom and I have syrup of Ipecac and laxatives and the rest of it, or I'm compulsively exercising, you have to let someone in on your secrets. Otherwise, the secrets run your life. And I chose to let him in once I had hope. Because that woman, Betsy, oh my God, she gave me hope. And when you have hope, you can do anything. And I went on to do that. So, yeah.
You personified for me what it looks like to be a go-getter. Like, put the goal in front of you. Let's go. Whatever that thing is, I'm going to go do that thing.
Mhm.
And yet one of the goals you wanted to accomplish in high school, in college, shortly afterwards, was to stop this addiction with bulimia,
Yeah.
to become free of this thing. And nothing worked until you're in that church basement doing the 12 steps and you hear that girl saying, "Hey, I wrestle with this every day, but I wrestle forward." What was it
Yeah.
about that conversation and her voice that finally woke something up within you to recognize it's possible in your life too?
It's so interesting. I think probably your audience can tell I have no shame. This is not something I'm ashamed of. I don't hide it. It's part of my story. It's probably the best part of my story. But I remember I put down my needlepoint. I looked up and there was this by the way, Betsy's not her name. That's a pseudonym, but she had long blonde hair. Her face was shining. She looked beautiful. Her teeth were intact. And I could tell she was being authentic, that this was all a true story.
Yeah.
And there's something about that when you hear someone's authenticity, there's a place inside of your heart that just goes boing. And I just looked at her and I thought, she can help me. And if she can help me, I don't have to live this lie. All of these lies that I live with. I can't even keep track of my lies, my misery, my obsession. It was like one arm tied behind my back all the time. And so that conversation gave me hope. It gave me a role model. And I went up to her afterwards and I said, "Will you sponsor me?" And she looked at me and she said, "Of course I will. Let's meet like tomorrow. Let's talk." And, I mean, just the giving that you see in these 12-step groups, this unselfish giving, not transactional, no money's exchanging hands. You don't even know people's last names. I mean, the unselfishness and the altruism is, I think Bill Wilson starting AA 100 years ago is probably one of the world's greatest philanthropists when you look at what happened. So I did get sober on top of that. And so I have been substance-free, abstinent from bulimia for most of my life now. And it's because this one person started this 12-step program, then this other person went and unselfishly said, "I can help you." So that moment is like one of those, when I'm on my deathbed, that will be right up there as one of the moments that changed my life forever.
I've heard you say repeatedly that one of the great joys in your life is to become a sponsor for others.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Because that's really what happiness is about. The moment that you feel like you have something to give somebody else and you can see that the lights go on in their eyes, or you hear their appreciation, or you just know that you've given something that has no monetary value, but that carries great weight with it, you know you've done something good. And so when I went to school in 2005 and got this degree in positive psychology at Penn at midlife, that's when I realized, oh, they talk about altruism and gratitude and positive emotions. All those things were part of what happened to me in that program, in that church basement. So sponsoring other people is positive psychology on steroids.
Hmm.
That's joy. And it's so addictive once you do it.
I want to talk about your book, My Name is Caroline. But before you're able to write that book, you've got to sit across belly to belly with your boyfriend, fiance, husband,
Husband,
life
husband.
partner, and say, by the way, I've been keeping something from you.
Yeah.
What was that conversation like?
Shock and awe. I mean, it was a time when we all knew people with eating disorders. At Harvard, there were some very beautiful athletes. I remember they were like the talk of Harvard. They were beautiful, but they were anorexic. And, my husband knew them, and he just like, are you like them? And I was like, yeah, but anorexia is different from bulimia. And he's like, that's, I'll help you. I'll follow you in the bathroom. But he didn't know what to do. He was clueless, as are most people. And so, but it felt like this great wave. When you leave for the law firm in the morning, I spend all day binging and purging. And it was just getting it off my chest. So the shock and awe, his relief that, now I know something, I think I can help, but it wasn't helpful. When you follow someone into a bathroom when they're bulimic, it isn't helpful. So he had to learn pretty early that it was my battle. At least I was out in the open. And so he did whatever it took to actually help me at that point, but I had to tell him what helped me. So it was a relief, but most people at the time were so horrified because they didn't know enough, except that this is what people die from. This is what Karen Carpenter died from.
Yeah.
That I think people just didn't know enough to know that people could recover. But again, I was the first person to go public and say, you can recover from this. So there was no hope. So that's kind of what I saw in his face, and it took him a long time to trust me.
You talked about going public. These days, everything is in the public. In
Yeah.
fact, we almost celebrate scars and brokenness and victimhood. It's
Yeah.
it's a badge of honor now for many of us.
Yeah.
This book, though, is going to be rolling out at a time when we buried that type of stuff, all of it. So, what gave you the courage or the insight to recognize the story that you have been living in the shadows is now into the light, and you want to make sure others recognize there's power and hope within their stories too?
Yeah. Thank you for asking me these questions, because I don't get to talk about this as much as I used to. And I think it's an important story. So there was a bidding war when I shopped my story in New York, and an agent, actually it was Ali Sheedy's mother, Charlotte Sheedy. She decided to take me on. There was a bidding war. People wanted to hear about it. But I decided there was no courage involved. I can honestly say I didn't feel brave. I didn't feel courageous. I just thought, this has to come out. People have to know that one person got better. Maybe the way I did it isn't going to work for everybody, but I just felt, convicted. This is a story that I believe will help people. The aftermath was fascinating. And I have
Yeah.
to say that, yes, now everybody talks about this. And what I don't think is a good idea is a lot of people who don't have recovery talk about it. So you put yourself out there as a role model, but if you don't have recovery, you don't even realize that people have now put you on a pedestal and they're going to do what you do. And if you relapse in the public eye because you don't have strong recovery, you've really done more damage than good. But Betty Ford came out with her memoir of recovery, and Doubleday had published that, and they bought my book because they thought, we see the good she's doing, we're going to put it out there. But the reaction still hurts. I mean, yes, it sold hundreds of thousands of books, and I became very famous overnight, but the reviews in the Sunday New York Times book review and the Washington Post, written by women, were cruel. This woman doesn't love her husband. Who is going to read about this revolting disease or disorder? Why would anyone want to read this? I mean, I can still feel the burning shame of those reviews from women in those two publications. So I think it was mixed. And now it's completely different. You come out, the world hugs you. Oh, God, tell us your story. Go on the cover of People magazine. But back then, there was a lot of shame. There was a lot of making fun of me. But then I was invited on a lot of shows too, all of them. And people would ask me to bring young, sick bulimics or anorexics with me because it made for better TV. And I had to turn down some of the world's biggest shows because I said, that's not why I wrote this book. I wrote the book to give people hope. And so I had to take a stand very early. It isn't about being famous and selling books. I want to give people hope. So a lot of people met me in the right place in the right way. And then some just shamed me. And that, I think, has changed. I don't think women always come out in support of other women. And that's something I've written about. And that's something I look at the research on now because I still think it follows women around. I think it's the hidden hand that pulls women down. And I don't think there's been as much forward movement in the eating disorder world as there has been with addiction and recovery and alcoholism and drug abuse, because you primarily see, not always, but a lot of men. And that's more public. But for women, it's a woman's disorder. And I think that has been a piece of why we haven't made the progress. I sat on these shows and I was looked at like a chemistry experiment. I remember this one man in Seattle. I'll never forget this lunchtime interview I did on live TV. He looked at me with like curiosity. He goes, "Did you write this book all by yourself?" And I literally came this close to saying, with my own little hands, I wrote this book. I mean, it was just like I was like a bug. Everybody was like, oh, look, she's talking about that thing. Look at her. Oh, she looks okay, but it's kind of weird. So I was like a chemistry experiment. And so I was prodded and pinched and poked and the rest of it. But the fact of the matter is, hundreds of thousands of people wrote to me and still do and say they remember the moment they saw that book in a library or bookstore. And that is the moment they all knew they could get better. And I remember this day in Baltimore, Dear Abby wrote about my book. And I went to pick up, I got a little slip saying, come to the post office, get your mail. I was like, come to the post office, get my mail. So I go to this post office and everybody who worked there disappeared to the back and came back holding a huge box. And the letters were like this. And they all came out and they said, did you win the lottery, lady? And I was like, no, I just got written about. So every one of those letters was, you're the first person I've ever written to. Thank you so much. I have hope. And then out would come these beautiful pictures of cheerleaders and ballerinas and Army veterans and people who had never told their story to anybody. And I made it safe. And to this day, you can see why I'm so grateful I recovered. It is the touchstone for everything else I've done in life that's hard. And it made a difference in the world. And if I die tonight, that's been my mitzvah to the world.
It made a profound impact. It continues to. I was reading some of the Amazon reviews recently, and
Oh,
if
God.
I had to be grateful for them, because unlike the New York Times or the Washington Post, they are written by people whose lives are authentically and profoundly affected by it. And the most common review I saw was, "This book saved my life. This book saved my life."
Wow.
So
I had not
congratulations
know.
on saving not just one life, but many. Then
Wow.
having a child, and then another child, and
Yeah.
then onward into
And
motherhood you
my
go. And
child.
then
Yeah.
Time Magazine runs an article, early 2000s, The Science of Happiness. I
Yes.
think many of us will remember that the cover. It was a beautiful cover, little smiley
Big smiley
face.
face.
Yep.
Yeah.
How did that cover story change your life?
Yeah. So it was January of 2005, the new Science of Happiness, big smiley face. The whole issue was devoted to the science of happiness. And there was one little paragraph that was pulsing. It was neon. It was pulsing out of it. And it said, the University of Pennsylvania is going to take 34 men and women from all over the world in the first ever Masters of Applied Positive Psychology program. And I just, talk about convicted. It was like hearing Betsy say, I'm in recovery one day at a time from bulimia. I just knew I had to get into that program. I'd never heard of a program after Harvard that I'd ever wanted to do. My parents thought I was going to be a lawyer. That didn't appeal to me. And so I'd never gone back to school. So I called Harvard. I was like, do you still have transcripts from 1983? I've never seen it. So I got it, and I filled out the application. It was like right at the deadline. And then I didn't think it was sufficient. So I added a bunch more questions. Like here are the questions you didn't ask. Like, why should you take me? And then I gave them 10 reasons why you should take me. I remember the last one was because I'm fun. And I got in, and I was completely transformed by learning positive psychology. Being in that course changed me as a woman, a mother, a friend, a sister, as a professional, because once you are privy to the science of happiness, the bell has been rung in your life, and you cannot unhear 1 minute of what you just heard. Things like gratitude is the number one strength of happy people. Happiness precedes success. Just on and on. And once you hear it, you begin to say to yourself, am I living the right way? Do I have the right friends? Am I doing this right? People come out of it transformed, unlike any other professional degree I've ever heard of. And Marty Seligman wrote about me in his book, Flourish, because I remember saying to him, Marty, you come out of this different. It's not like going to dental school. And then he wrote about my capstone, which became the book, Creating Your Best Life. So anyway, it just changed my world, rocked my world, still does.
You dropped several tattoo-worthy quotes there, but one of them is happiness precedes success.
Success. Yeah.
And we look, you look at your school, high school, college, and
Yep.
we are teaching the exact opposite.
Yeah.
We're teaching them to pursue success. And in doing so, ultimately, if they get there, if they bring the bell loud enough at the top of the rung, then they will find the happiness they seek. And you come at it from the exact opposite direction. Talk about why you know that matters these days.
Well, so there's like, what? But this was one of the first assignments, and we actually met the researchers. So Sonia Lubomirsky, Ed Diener, Laura King, 3 of the top scholars in the field of positive psychology, or even psychology at the time. They did this meta-analysis where they looked at every finding on success in life, success in business, religion, love, whatever. And they found very conclusively that all success in every domain of life is preceded by being in an emotionally flourishing place first, being happy. Now, happiness has many different connotations: awe, pride, joy, contentment, love, whatever. But when you're flourishing emotionally, you succeed. And I remember sitting, and this happened to me a ton in these classrooms. My life was on rewind. I was reading the research and thinking, wow, all those years I was chasing SAT scores and piano concertos and the rest of it, thinking it would make me happy. Now I get it. I had to flourish first. I had to prize relationships. One thing we heard over and over is other people matter. Positive psychology boils down to this one little phrase: other people matter. And in my family, it was not other people matter. It was you better be first or else. And friendship was not something I was told to aspire to. It was all competition. And so I'm sitting there thinking, how different might my life have been if I'd understood this? So probably wouldn't have had an eating disorder. So anyway, bottom line is that finding blew me away.
The problem when I interview people like you, my friend, is there's so much to discuss that we cannot possibly get through it. But one of the questions on my sheet that I really want you to talk about is goal setting theory, because it's really not well known. You live in this world, so you breathe this air, but many of us probably are completely unaware of it. So tell us what goal setting theory is.
Okay, so let me just remind everybody that I come from this family of Olympic gold, silver, bronze medalists, the only siblings to go 1-2 in the same event, world records, blah, blah, blah. I grew up thinking that I understood how to set, pursue, and achieve goals. I had all the books. I had the Brian Tracy, Zig Ziglar, Stephen Covey, all these white men, all these men who had written motivational books on goal setting. I owned them all. I thought I knew goal setting. And then we were assigned Locke and Latham, Edwin Locke, Gary Latham. Let's honor them with their full names. Their goal setting theory, published in 1990. And I remember saying out loud, I think people still remember hearing me say this: there is a science to goal setting called goal setting theory. And I arranged to have the entire textbook on it loaned to me by Drexel, copied every single page, actually paid my daughter to help me do it, $1 a page, because I was so hungry. And I came home and I looked at every book on the bookshelf, and I would flip to the back. There were no footnotes. There was no research. There was no evidence. as compared to goal setting theory, which is, let me just say this, the number one ranked management theory of all time of 73 theories, ranked by scholars, ranked by experts in the fields of motivation, psychology, and success. So Locke and Latham, these two men, did decades of rigorous scholarship that was replicated thousands of times, no replication challenges, no faking of results. And I was like, I don't know this. So my capstone project that year combined a lot of the different research I learned that year, but I felt the world, just like I felt the world needed to know someone recovered from bulimia. I was like, the world needs to know that they are setting and pursuing goals, and companies are doing the same thing with urban legends like SMART goals or the law of attraction or the Harvard study of 1950. All of them are BS, just complete crap. I call them zombie theories because they won't die, particularly SMART goals, which was just sticky. And I felt like the world needed to know there was a science to goal setting and that happiness preceded success. So that book, Creating Your Best Life, just rocketed to the top of the bestseller list, came out in 2008, but I think it was marketed poorly. It was a life list book. And it still is ranked number one in a lot of countries, but not now, for goal setting, because it was the first evidence-based book on goal setting. What I did, though, was I came out as a woman talking about goal setting, and that is a taboo. Women don't talk about goals. Women are not allowed to be agentic. So I violated stereotype norms. It created stereotype threat for a woman to talk about goal setting. Here I am 15 years later, even more convinced the world needs this science. And that's the book behind me. But those were just remarkable findings. And I thought, much like Andrew Huberman with the Huberman Lab, there's too much research hidden behind paywalls that the world doesn't have access to, that if you learn it, you can create protocols for your own life. That's been my goal, because everyone thinks they know how to set goals because everyone does it. But it's like Annie Duke talking about decision-making. Like, people start making decisions as toddlers. Doesn't mean they know decision-making science. I'm out to bring goal-setting science to the world because we need it more than ever right now.
Well, let's unpack it a bit. Ultimately, folks who want to take a deeper dive can go ahead and pick up the book, Big Goals, The Science of Setting Them, Achieving Them, and Creating Your Best Life. But let's begin by putting aside SMART goals. I've heard you on various episodes of other podcasts and interviews adamantly take a stand against SMART
Yeah.
goals. What's your problem with SMART goals? Everybody else loves them.
Because it's catchy. I'll just give you the number one problem I have with it, which is the most undermining thing of all. Locke and Latham's goal setting theory divides goal setting goals into two buckets: learning goals and performance goals. Learning goals are things you have not done before. Maybe the world hasn't done them before, and you need to acquire skills and knowledge in order to accomplish those goals, which means you can't set a date by which you'll have a certain outcome. Performance goals are checklist goals. Surgeons going into operating theaters, pilots doing pre-flight checks, maids cleaning hotel rooms. Those are things you've done before that could fit on a checklist. You could even give it to someone else and they'd have a good chance of achieving that goal. What they found for both kinds of goals is that if the best possible outcome is always past your fingertips, out go my hands, out past my fingertips, challenging and specific. So let's just put that on the top of our brains. Challenging and specific is the best kind of goals. Let's go to SMART. So what does SMART tend to stand for? Usually what you hear are realistic and attainable for the A and the R. And that immediately is blown to pieces when you understand the science of goal setting. Challenging and specific is not attainable or reachable or realistic. So those are considered low goals. So the science shows over and over again, if you use SMART, and the other problem is it's got jargon mishmash syndrome written all over it, because those SMART mean different things to different people. So it's lost all of its credibility and all of its power because it doesn't mean the same thing from setting to setting. You immediately undermine your ability to achieve your best possible outcomes if you use SMART. And there's research in the book that I cite showing this. So I just want to kill it off. It's not true. We're not in the 20th century law of attraction SMART goals anymore. It was written by a consultant going to a workshop he was given, and he wrote about it. It's like, why is this so sticky? It's crap. Okay, I'll stop.
Well, don't. Why don't we shift from smart into bridge?
Yeah.
How can the bridge framework be more
Okay.
supportive? And again,
Okay.
we're speaking to folks. Some of them are high achievers and they're climbing up to the tippity
Yeah.
top rung.
Yeah.
Good. Others are grandparents listening to our conversation who are trying to finish well and while doing so, love their children, take care of their grandbabies,
Yeah.
make a difference in their life. So, for
Yeah.
all of us, regardless of where we are, what age we might find ourselves
Yeah.
listening to the conversation, how can your approach be more
Yeah.
effective for us in ours?
So for 15 years since Creating Your Best Life came out, I have been continuing to study the research on what makes success possible. And during this period of time, we've had numerous breakthroughs in how data is collected and parsed. So Nick Christakis and James Fowler, they took the Framingham Heart Study research and they parsed it and they found out there was something called emotional contagion, that moods are caught, obesity is a catchable kind of emotion, and so on and so forth. And now we have artificial intelligence, which is taking a look at data in new ways. And we're also now asking new questions of the research in terms of gender. And this to me is one of the most powerful things that's happened is we now have a whole new way of looking at research and saying, but does this advice that works for men, particularly white men, does it work for people of different cultures and backgrounds and women in particular? And the answer is no. And I don't think those questions have been asked enough. And so for 15 years, I've been gathering all of the latest research on grit, on mindset, on resilience, on priming, on brainstorming. My gosh, the inadequacy in brainstorming approaches is just stunning when you look at it. Decision science, game theory. And so that's all missing from the field of goal setting. So what I do is I start with the engine of setting a strategy for whatever your goal is: reinvention, changing careers, making your high school team, getting your first promotion, whatever your big goal is. Remember, your big goal is not someone else's big goal. It's the thing that's going to make you proud of yourself, that's outside of your comfort zone, that involves probably learning new things in new ways. You start with goal setting theory. Is it a performance goal or a learning goal? And then you go into this 6-step method that contains all of the areas you must look at and ask the right questions about in order to have a strategy that's foolproof. So it's brainstorming, taking a look at the relationships in your life, good and bad, the investments that you need to make of time, money, and energy, decision-making science, noise versus bias. I mean, Danny Kahneman, before he died earlier this year, it's all about noise. It's not bias that infects bad decisions, it's noise. Good grit, Angela Duckworth's work. I love Angela. She's a friend of mine. She's endorsed all of my books, which is wonderful. But there is good grit and there's bad grit. There's stupid grit, and then there's authentic grit, and then excellence. What are the standards of excellence? So if you start with goal setting theory and then go through the prompts in the book in each chapter, you will have done what the ancient Stoics called premeditatio malorum, premeditate the evils, and premeditatio bonum, which I made up. Premeditate the good that's on the path in front of you. And if you do that and don't skip a step, I can guarantee you that you're going to achieve whatever that goal is, if it's well-formed and the strategy is well-formed, or you're
Right.
going to get closer than you've ever gotten. So that's why my bridge methodology is so groundbreaking.
So you and I have 10 minutes left or so to party together, and there's a lot of land to cover.
Yeah.
If someone was interested in saying, "Gosh, but where do I begin?
Mhm,
What's the very first thing I would do to wake up from this malaise, to stop
mhm,
sleepwalking, and
mhm,
to lose that weight, to
mhm.
get out of debt, to get
Yeah.
into a better relationship, a healthier one, a life-giving one, to reignite my faith?
Yeah.
What would you encourage them to take as their very first step?"
Think about the things that you will regret not pursuing if you're looking back on your life in 10 years, 20 years, 1 year. What will you regret not pursuing? Because people harbor a lot of fears about, if I articulate it or if I dare to, go after it, I'll fail because my New Year's resolutions haven't worked or whatever. But just think about, what's your goal? My recovery from bulimia is how I developed grit. What is intrinsically motivating to you? What do you care about? What is going to create the biggest bang for the buck in your life if you go after that? And if you have to stage up in steps in the called leverage goals. If you achieve this, then this is more likely, this is more likely. Break it down into pieces. Then you build what's called self-efficacy. But start with, what will I regret not pursuing? If I could wake up tomorrow and one thing in my life had changed that I have some control and mastery over, what is that big goal? And just start there. One. Now, one thing I want to throw in there that's also in this book that I don't think most people know is everyone talks about learned helplessness as if that's still a thing. That was overturned almost 10 years ago. That's another finding in academia that just isn't out there. And so we are born helpless. We don't learn helplessness. And Marty Seligman and Stephen Mayer, who did this original research in the 60s, again, have new ways of looking at dogs who are shocked. And they found that you learn mastery. The dogs who jumped out of the cages were learning mastery. The ones who lay down weren't learning helplessness. It's how you look at this. So we as human beings are born helpless, and our charge in life, our goal, the thing that we are put on a mission to do in order to be autonomous and to flourish, is we must master our environments. And that includes having our own goals and learning what we're made of along the way. So start with something that's important to you. Use the book and the worksheets to break it down step by step by step. Don't skip a step. And then write to me and tell me what happened.
You mentioned near the end of the book about positive interventions.
Yes.
Tell me first of all, why does that matter? Why can't I just do my life? Sit in traffic and listen to the radio and just be busy and do my thing. Why does positive intervention actually matter and elevate our lives?
So positive interventions, that's a phrase from the field of positive psychology. When we learned that happiness preceded success, and that happiness was malleable, that we're born a certain way, but we can then change our set point by introducing things like meditation and exercise and altruistic behavior and gratitude, et cetera, journaling, when those are the things that we can use to boot up every day so that we are then in a flourishing place. Everybody responds a little differently, but these are the interventions that work for most people. So it's important that we see our lives as things that we can intervene on with certain behaviors. So positive interventions are about boosting our flourishing. But what we want to do is live lives where we're building confidence and self-esteem. And the only way to do it is by doing things outside of our comfort zone. So that's why it matters. You want to live life forward by building on who you are, what you do, what your character strengths are. And that's how you then go on to create an environment of, again, confidence, flourishing, and then you inspire other people. My 3 children were raised at a time when we were told to just tell them they were winners, give them all trophies, dumb down the playgrounds, give them all comfort animals. And the findings are in, we created narcissists and sociopaths. You want to do hard things. So that entire generation was sold a bill of goods by the adults in their lives. And so we know very conclusively that you have to embrace positive interventions. And part of those positive interventions is seeing what you're made of and doing things that are important to you, not just to the people around you.
So one of the final questions before we shift into what we call the Live Inspired 7, it's a speed round of 7 questions, but right before we get there, for the individual listening to our conversation thinking, gosh, great ideas, great concepts, love her energy, love her insights. And she went to Harvard and she's married and she's got the support of her kids and she's got 10 best-selling books out there now. And she's got all these resources and all this wherewithal to do this stuff. I'm too old. I'm too young. I'm too rich. I'm too poor. Whatever the excuses they may be making might be right now. What would be your encouragement for them to recognize about their life?
Big goals are not about the family you're born into, the education you got, the adversity you had, none of that. It's all about you having a dream, and everyone has a dream. And if you have a dream, you deserve to have the science to help you accomplish that. And that's available to anyone now that it's all in this one book. So it's truly agnostic. And some of the success and what you're looking at in terms of me is not what we're talking about. It's agnostic. The people who've inspired me to do the hardest things are people who have what I call ordinary grit. People like you and me who probably didn't even finish high school. Some of the most important exemplars of courage and grit and big goals in my life are people from my martial arts team who didn't go to college, who didn't have access to some of the things I had, come from different cultures, and it's available to everybody. So don't be fooled by what you see. So I hope that answers your question, because it's really not about that. It's about having the right guidance in your hands to make your own dreams come true. And we all have them.
So then my final question around this before we shift is, your whole answer began with this idea of everybody's got a dream.
Yes.
And I think deep down that's true, but many of us have forgotten how to dream. So for
Mhm.
those of us who are just on the treadmill, or we're just kind of sleepwalking our way through life, and we don't have that dream, we don't have that zest again for
Yeah.
tomorrow, how do you
Yeah.
reignite that?
I think you have to watch what's coming into your life. Are you watching depressing news? We know that if it bleeds, it leads. I was told to bring young, sick bulimics and anorexics on TV. We're surrounded by negativity, and we know from positive psychology that bad is bigger than good. So erase that from your life as much as possible, contain the negative relationships, and then let that still small voice inside of you when you're alone and you think, what makes my heart beat a little bit faster? If tomorrow I could wake up and at least one amazing thing had happened that made my life feel a little bit more worthwhile or meaningful, or I got to use my strengths to make a difference in someone else's world, what would that thing be? But you have to sometimes kind of get the garbage out of your life or contain it. And that's what I would say is find that place inside of you, because we know we're born to master the world. We are born with that longing. We know this from self-determination theory. We know this from learned mastery. We all have it. It's a drive we're born with. Find it. Find it by staying away from any force that encourages you to look away from that, and then just go for it.
Caroline, we have 7 questions that every one of our almost 800 guests now have been asked and have answered effectively. So here we go. Question number 1 from the Live Inspired 7 is, what's been the most impactful book you've ever read?
I think Little Women. I read that when I
Oh,
was 8 years old. And I remember there was a sister, Jo, who was a go-getter. And I thought, I want to be her. And that just really stands out to me.
the 4 O'Leary girls I was raised next to, my sisters, all read that book. All of them loved that book and all identified with the character Jo. So I'm glad to hear that in your repertoire.
I
What's
love
one
that.
what's one positive characteristic or one trait that you possessed as a little girl growing up in the shadows of DC
Yeah.
that you wish you exhibited as brilliantly today?
That I wish I exhibited as brilliantly. I am that little girl. So there's nothing missing from my little girl life. I am zest. I am joy. There was a thundercloud over me for a long time, but I am that little girl again. Everyone would tell you that.
Hmm. If your home caught fire and your dog, your husband, your children, and grandbaby are all out safely, but you have an opportunity of running in and grabbing one item, one
Mm.
physical thing that matters to you, what's the one thing you come racing out of that burning house with?
My grandmother's diary. It had one entry in it, and it was about me. And it said that my eens teen tweens, me, comes into a room swirling and twirling, and she's full of life and zest, but the world's going to punish her for it. And then she had a picture of me with a big smile on my face at the age of 3 and a black tooth, because I'd thrown my face down onto a wall because my sister beat me to get the paper that day. And it was almost like, wow, she sees me. I would go back and get that one diary, and that would say, yeah, everything.
That's deep. If you could sit on a bench on a gorgeous day and have a long conversation with anyone living or deceased, who would you like to be seated next to?
Wow. I was asked that recently and I thought hard about it, and I think it's Serena Williams. I want to talk to someone who overcame so much bias and racism to still be gracious and groundbreaking, and she exhibits class. And I'd like to know, what is it about her that wakes up with so much joy and hope and optimism, and yet she's coachable? You know, she surrounds herself with people who give her feedback that she wants to hear. That is such a rare quality.
What's the best advice you've ever received?
You can't keep what you don't give away.
It's funny you bring that up. I over prepare for these interviews, and
Yeah.
that was one of the quotes I was going to ask you about 4 hours ago when this conversation began. Tell me what it means to you. You can't keep what you don't give away.
Yeah, I was in good recovery from my eating disorder a few years into it. I was like, wow, I wake up without this demon in my life. And somebody said to me, but Caroline, that's great, but you can't keep what you don't give away. And it was just encouragement to keep sponsoring people, keep giving away my story without strings. And boy, it was one of the wisest things that's ever been said to me because
Awesome.
it applies to everything in life.
What advice would you give yourself at age 20? If you could go back in time just a couple of years to who you
Yeah.
were at age 20, what would you say?
You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. You're going to love yourself one day and just keep looking for those bright lights who have the heliotropic effect. They make you open up like a lily or sunflower. Look for those people. They're going to guide you.
Mm. Caroline Adams Miller, it has been said that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you like yours to read?
She never gave up.
Caroline, author, mother, grandmother, spouse, swimmer, yes, even still, black belt karate expert, and friend to countless others. I want to thank you for never giving up and for being part of our podcast.
Wow. Wow. This has been just an amazing interview. Thank you for everything you do to prepare and to bring these stories to the world. Thank you.
My friends, that is Caroline Adams Miller. My name is John O'Leary, and today is your day. What a gift it is. Live inspired.
My friends, as we are about 2.5 weeks away from the new year, a season of fresh starts and renewed aspirations, I hope today's conversation with renowned goal-setting expert Caroline Adams Miller helped spark some new energy and served as a reminder that your best days, in spite of the headwind and challenges, are ahead. In our conversation, Caroline shared that happiness precedes success. I love that quote. Meaning that when you are flourishing emotionally, you can also succeed vibrantly elsewhere. To learn more about the connection between happiness and success, you may want to learn a little bit more about it from my friend and now yours. His name is Shawn Achor. Acclaimed happiness expert Shawn Achor reminded us during the conversation that it is in the darkest times that we need optimism, gratitude, and social connection the absolute most. After 12 years of earning dozens of distinguished teaching awards at Harvard University, what is it with the guys from Harvard University? Well, Shawn stepped away, became a New York Times best-selling author of The Happiness Advantage and Big Potential, delivered a TED Talk with over 19 million views, what a show-off, and then stepped away from the busyness of his world and his life to record a podcast with Live Inspired and your buddy John O'Leary. It's a great episode. It's a great conversation. If you want to listen to it right now, cruise on over to episode 408 of the Live Inspired podcast, or you can let your fingers do the walking. Cruise with me over to johnolearyinspires.com/podcast. In the show notes of today's episode, we will have a link for that Shawn Achor episode. You'll love it. Well, family and friends, servants and leaders, I want to thank you, as I always do, for joining us on this Live Inspired podcast. I want to thank you for believing what I know to be true. The foundation is firm. The headwind we face may be real, but the best is yet to come. So for this time and until next time, my name is John O'Leary. Today is your day. What a gift. Live inspired.
Keeley Companies was started almost 50 years ago by the one and only Larry Keeley. What started as a small family-owned paving company in St. Louis has grown to a nationally known full-service construction, development, and restoration partner. Larry the Legend, as he is affectionately known, has been a part of this growth every step of the way and continues to provide guidance as his son Rusty, my buddy, drives their vision and achieves results on purpose. His unwavering foundation of a family culture with a focus on people has gotten Keeley Companies to where they are today, and their journey is truly just beginning. To learn more about Larry the Legend and Keeley Companies, check them out at KeeleyCompanies.com.